The modern media landscape is inundated with incompetence and soullessness. From the shambling corpse that is the Marvel Cinematic Universe to the endless assaults on once beloved characters and franchises. Second perhaps only to Star Wars, Halo is among one of the most tarnished. It had been handed off to an incompetent custodian and brutalized by a studio that had no reverence for its legacy or any understanding of what made it matter. I first received an Xbox in 2002. It was a birthday present for a 6-year-old me. I had spent my day playing Bloodwake and Max Payne, thinking I was satisfied. Then that night, an uncle stopped by with a last-minute gift. And drawn in by that shiny Game of the Year sticker, he handed me a new title. Halo Combat Evolved. And that night, everything changed. I fell in love not with just a game that would define my childhood. I fell in love with media itself. Now, in the age of the video essay, Halo has been revisited, yet something's missing. Some creators understand the systems, but make leaps with the story and lore. Others grasp the story and lore, but gloss over the mechanics. And many, unfortunately, settle for nostalgia without ever really digging into why Halo mattered in the first place. And so, I'm going to give it my attempt. An attempt to make an in-depth retrospective analysis of Halo Combat Evolved. I'm Zach from Etc., and this is my Halo Retrospective. Our story begins in a single apartment in Chicago. Alex Seropian, a young developer with a head full of ideas, partnered with a programmer named Jason Jones. Together the two would go on to create a studio that would one day define an era. Bungie. In those early days, they released Knop, a Pong clone, and Minotaur, the Labyrinths of Crete, both for the Macintosh. They had no budget, marketing, or distribution pipeline. They folded their boxes by hand and burned the discs themselves. With a glimmer of success under their belt, Jones decided to chase a new ambition, a first-person shooter. Inspired by Wolfenstein 3D, Jones began work on a 3D engine. He brought on his friend Colin Brent to do the art, while Seropian handled all the business. The result? Pathways into Darkness. Developed under a brutal crunch for Macworld, Pathways was Bungie's first commercial success. It gave them enough momentum to move into a real studio space and start hiring staff. And with that expansion came a new game. A game that would embody a simple, radical idea that story matters in a shooter. This was blasphemy at the time. Shooters simply weren't story games. John Carmack himself, inventor of Doom, once said, quote, "Story in a game is like a story in a porn. It's expected, but not important." End quote. Bungie, however, disagreed. With Marathon, Bungie became innovators. It was one of the first FPS games to feature free look with the mouse. It was an end to the clunky, keyboard-only controls. You could move, aim, and shoot fluidly. But it wasn't just the tech that set the game apart. Marathon offered a very deep and cryptic story throughout its in-game terminals. It told a story about survival, sabotage, and sentient AIs. It was a shooter with something to say. On Macintosh, Marathon had no real competition, which caused demand to explode, meaning Bungie couldn't keep up with demand, so they ended up ditching their mail order model, which meant they didn't burn CDs themselves and they didn't have to take in faxes. They partnered with a real distributor. This success demanded a sequel. Marathon 2 released with a refined engine and added co-op multiplayer. This allowed it to outsell its original. Then came Marathon Infinity, which pushed their design principles even further, with an expanded sandbox and systemic enemy behavior. The Marathon series became the foundation for Bungie's DNA. Afterwards, they took a break from FPS games. They partnered with a small studio called Total Audio, which was run by Martin O'Donnell and Michael Salvatori. They ventured into a new genre, Myth, a real-time tactics game, because it had no base building or resource collection, but instead just had preset amounts of units that you had to use to conquer the battlefield. And this was yet another hit. They followed up Myth with Myth 2, Soulblighter, which added 3D models and better AI. However, it also came with a notorious disaster, a catastrophic bug. When you uninstalled the game, you could delete files outside of the game's directory, and if you installed it on your root drive, you could wipe out your OS. Now, most studios in the modern day would probably just patch this and hope most people ignored it. However, Bungie didn't do this. They recalled every single copy. They halted their distribution until they could fix the bug. They ate the cost of nearly $800,000, which was not a small chunk of change for this small studio, especially in an industry that hadn't developed to the size we know today. In a choice of integrity, Bungie made a choice that nearly destroyed them. To recover, they re-released their old catalog in partnership with Take-Two Interactive, but they also began heavily investing into a side project, a project that would eventually become Halo. And it needed visibility, and thanks to a newly hired executive, Peter Tomte, Bungie secured a slot at Macworld 1999. After the Macworld reveal, things began to move quickly behind the curtain. Peter Tomte approached Ed Fries of Microsoft. Fries was building the launch lineup for Microsoft's upcoming console, the Xbox. And Bungie, they were in financial trouble. Fries had always liked Myth, and upon hearing of Bungie's situation, he pushed hard for a deal. Negotiations with Take-Two Interactive followed, and on June 19, 2000, the deal was finalized. Halo was no longer going to be a Mac game. It was now an Xbox exclusive. Just before the ink dried, Bungie showed Halo at E3 2000, a sweeping sci-fi shooter with vehicles and massive combat arenas. It wasn't just impressive, it was different. But to understand what Bungie is going to pull off, we need to go back. The game that would eventually become Halo began as a side project simply known as Blam at the time. Originally built in the Myth engine, Blam was intended as a real-time strategy game. Early prototypes include a camera that let you zoom in to control individual units, most notably a certain vehicle, a bouncy, oversized Jeep. And it was fun. So fun, in fact, that the camera just kept getting closer and closer until it stopped being an RTS, and suddenly, the game became a third-person shooter. Most early assets were built around this third-person view. Additional staff were brought on to help, the likes of Jamie Griesmer, Marty O'Donnell and Michael Salvatori, and artist Shikai Wang. Even the name Halo wasn't set in stone. It was originally rejected for being, quote, too religious, with other titles like The Covenant being considered, but nothing really stuck. And, with another list being created, Halo was brought back onto this list. And Jason Jones, who hated every other name up to that point, simply said, "That's the one." And thus Halo was set in stone. At this point, Halo was still a third-person shooter. The rough demo that was presented to Steve Jobs, that was scored by Marty O'Donnell in a single weekend, was built on that camera system. That's what the world saw at Macworld 99. But the team wasn't happy with how it felt. The third-person view lacked impact. The game didn't feel intimate. Jason Jones, who originally resisted the idea of a first-person shooter again, finally relented, and with advances in hardware and new prototypes from engineers like Charlie Goh and Griesmer, it clicked. They made the leap. Halo became a first-person shooter, and like many Bungie decisions, once it clicked, it stuck.
Yeah, people probably want to know why we switched from third person to first person.
Why did we?
Yeah.
Well, why did we?
Oh, why did we? Because Jason...
Jason again.
Yeah, it's all this damn Jason, man. He's not here, is he? Yeah, that's Jason, I tell you.
Well, he was the one that was dead set against first person for a long time.
Yeah, and then
right?
he's like, hey, wait, we can't make third person work. Hey, let's change it back.
That's what happened.
The truth comes out.
That's what happens when your lead is a crack addict.
Oh, dang.
With Microsoft now holding the reins, Bungie was relocated to Redmond, Washington. They had entered full production. And then they hit a wall. All they had was the E3 demo and a working 4v4 multiplayer prototype used for internal testing. And their release date was locked in to November 15th, 2001, in order to meet Christmas. 9 months. They had 9 months to complete the entire game. Campaign, cutscenes, music, multiplayer, polish, all of it. As Marcus Leader would put it, they were basically on fire. Griezmer moved to Seattle, but never unpacked his boxes for the first 6 months of working on the game. Other Bungie projects were frozen. Every resource was redirected to Halo. The open world concept was scrapped. Instead, missions were broken up into linear levels, and with limited amounts of assets, were forced to be more creative and more modular with their design. Many levels were cut, and story moments were being rewritten on the fly. Joe Staten had to lock in cutscenes the moment they were animated and make changes as levels were cut. Marty O'Donnell and Jane Wineland had to compose and implement music and other Foley sounds under brutal crunch. Then, just as things stabilized, they had to redesign their entire multiplayer mode from scratch. Split-screen co-op and Xbox LAN demanded a full rewrite, and it was chaos. But somehow, they did it. Through duct tape, genius, caffeine, or sheer willpower, Halo Combat Evolved would ship November 15th, 2001. Halo Combat Evolved opens with the iconic shot of the ring world. The orchestral score immediately evokes a sense of wonder and mystery. We then see the Pillar of Autumn, a Halcyon-class cruiser, move slowly towards the ring. From the very first frame, Halo demonstrates its step up in cinematic quality compared to its contemporaries. With an intentional camera angle that invokes awe as the Pillar of Autumn slides into view escorted by fighters, and the fact that the information dialogue presents to us is incredibly important. With this dialogue, we learn about a core truth of Halo. Humanity is fighting a war, and it is losing. When Cortana speaks and informs Captain Keyes that, quote, Covenant ships have always been faster, end quote, we see that Covenant ships are superior to ours. When she outlines the force disparity with, quote, with multiple CCS-class battlegroups, with 3 capital ships per group, unquote, we can see they are more numerous than us, and the look on Keyes' face is enough to reinforce this truth. And just from this opening cutscene, we can take this as a segue to talk about the expanded lore of Halo, such as the novel Halo: The Fall of Reach by Eric Nyland. It was written alongside the game's development by Nyland, and he was given access to the, quote, Bible of the game's lore to work with. It was Nyland who gave Master Chief his name, John. Bungie chose 117 in reference to Revelation 1:17. Quote, when I saw him, I fell at his feet as though dead. Then he placed his right hand on me and said, quote, do not be afraid, I am the first and the last, end quote. The brilliance of early Halo lore was how expansive it was, but not being mandatory. You didn't need to read The Fall of Reach to enjoy the game, but if you did, you gained wonderful insight into the Spartan 2 program, the scale of the Human Covenant War, and the emotional context behind everything that happens in the game. The book rewards the reader after they've played and enhances every subsequent playthrough. In this specific case, knowing the odds the UNSC ships face against Covenant ships gives new weight to Keyes' expression, and you understand how truly doomed the Autumn is, and the knowledge motivates the player to fight even harder. Back to the gameplay, Keyes puts the ship on full alert and gives the command to awaken the Master Chief. With a message on the cryo chamber console, unseal the hushed casket. This is a poetic phrase that comes from John Keats. This is an example of Joe Staten's literary background, as Joe Staten was the one responsible for writing most of the cinematic and the story content of the game. After this cutscene, we're introduced to our avatar, Spartan John 117, and depending on the difficulty selection, players will either get a tutorial or are rushed into gameplay. In 2001, a tutorial wasn't just helpful, it was essential. Console shooters were still finding their footing, and Halo, while it didn't invent dual-stick FPS controls, it was the first to make them intuitive. This tutorial introduces your camera controls, including inverted options, as well as, more importantly, the revolutionary shield system. Unlike in previous FPS games that use static health pools and medkits, Halo introduced essentially a recharging health bar. And as a result, it created a system that reduced frustration and encouraged moment-to-moment engagement, because players were allowed to make more mistakes and learn from them without having to be reset to previous checkpoints. And It encouraged players to experiment more with their gameplay and push the envelope of what exactly they could get away with within the game's system. Regardless of if you completed the tutorial or not, the Covenant eventually strike, breaching the observation deck and killing Sam, the cryo-engineer who helped you through the tutorial, or otherwise simply dies after awakening you. Your guide, who leads you out of the room, shortly dies after an initial explosion, forcing you to backtrack and vault over barriers to begin your escape. This segment isn't about combat, it's all about immersion. You're dodging plasma fire, see crew members running around, firing their pistols, and you get the feeling that the Pillar of Autumn is under siege. All of this builds pressure. You need a weapon, and you must fight back. Eventually, after meeting a Marine who guides you through more firefights, you reach the bridge. Keys introduces you to Cortana, a 4th-generation smart AI created from a clone of Dr. Catherine Elizabeth Halsey's brain, who, if you read the book, Fall of Reach, you would know is the very mother of the Spartan 2 program. Cortana updates Keys. The ship's MAC gun is offline. And there's no hope. Keys invokes the Cole Protocol, Article 2. And to the average player, this would sound like average military jargon. But, again, if you've read the expanded lore, you get treated. It's a nuclear option, and you get to understand the magnitude of this invocation. The protocol forbids leading Covenant forces to Earth and mandates the destruction of all AI. And what Keys does next, breaking this rule by entrusting Cortana to you instead of destroying her, and giving you the mission to protect her at all costs, we get to see Keys' character in action. He's willing to bend rules in order to get what he believes would be better results. He then hands you his sidearm, the infamous M6D Magnum. And then, it's time to fight. Your first encounter pits you against 3 grunts, and your Magnum annihilates them. And soon after, you attain the MA5B assault rifle, the iconic weapon on the cover. And combat begins in earnest, and this is where Bungie's genius shines. Jamie Griesmer, tasked with designing the console shooter controls, faced a key challenge here. How do you make aiming with analog sticks fun? And his solutions would soon become the industry standard that we are all familiar with today, such as input staging, where the game interprets your intent rather than the raw analog input data. Bullet magnetism, or aim assist. So long as enemies are within your reticle, bullets will be drawn towards that target. And, more importantly, reticle slowdown, where your aim will slow down ever so slightly when it passes over enemies who are in optimum range, easing the ability to aim and find targets in a first-person shooter on a console. These systems, when combined, create Halo's buttery smooth combat, and this is why Halo's gunplay feels so good with controllers, even playing in 2025. The gunplay is fun and engaging. Combat soon escalates. You're now facing Senghili elites. These are fast, shielded, and dangerous. And in this encounter, you must decide. Are you going to clear out the grunts first to reduce the volume of fire, or are you going to focus down the larger threat in the elite? And this is what makes Halo's gameplay so special. Combat is decision-making, and your tactics here matter. And, at times, like this one, you'll have Marines to support you. Regardless of your decision, cleaning up this encounter, you move forward and begin to move through the ship. The Marines will secure airlocks and explosions start rocking the ship. And at your first airlock, you'll encounter an overshield. A throwback to classic first-person shooter power-ups, and while nostalgic, it does break the balance of the game. Overshields allow you to be a bit more reckless, and active camo trivializes entire encounters and sections. However, throughout this level, environmental storytelling remains strong. You encounter fewer Marines as you move through the ship. You can even find 2 unarmed crew members fleeing, and if you're fast enough, you can save them. And these are the details that give life to this entire level, and to the environment. Soon you reach a large room with a second floor, with Covenant reinforcements pouring in, and you're given yet another choice. Do you stay here on the first floor and attempt to engage in a firefight with the Marines around you? Or do you push forwards, taking the fight into close quarters in order to relieve pressure from those same Marines? Again, you're given choices, and each of your choices matter in each encounter. And each decision has risks and rewards. Regardless, clearing up all these encounters, you start nearing the escape pods, your objective, your way to get off the ship. And as you go to a cluster of these pods, you see them start to escape, with one even being destroyed by an incoming plasma torpedo, and reinforcing the amount of danger you're in. And eventually we are forced into the maintenance tunnels. Very tight and dark spaces where we're forced to use our flashlight and motion tracker to coordinate an escape route. However, there is an issue here in this section. It introduces your melee attacks, but it's far too late. By now, most players likely would have figured out melee through experimentation, and trying to teach it to you like 3/4 of the way through a level on a stuck door is awkward. One, the melee attack is never used in this way again to unstick a door, and two, its usefulness as a combat mechanic isn't really reinforced here. Regardless, you regroup with surviving Marines and you get the final piece of your kit for the Halo combat triangle, which is grenades. And you use these grenades to obliterate the final wave of Covenant troops. And this level ends with a cutscene aboard the escape pod. Chief rescues another Marine who falls to his knees, and even offers comfort to the other frightened Marines as the escape pod jettisons out, reminding us that he is a human underneath that armor. And as the pod hurtles through space, we get our first true look of Halo as the Pillar of Autumn flies past us, heavily damaged and heading for the ring, the same destination we're going towards. And with that, our journey truly begins. The level Halo begins with urgency. Your escape pod hurtles through the atmosphere with systems failing and the pilot yelling for everyone to brace. After the impact, you awaken amidst the wreckage only to find the Marines and the pilot who helped you escape all dead. And then comes the moment. Stepping out onto the ring, and you get to look up and see that the horizon bends upwards. And for 2001, this was breathtaking. A realized alien ring world stretching overhead. It's one of the most iconic reveals in gaming history. However, Cortana quickly brings us back to reality. There are Covenant dropships en route, and we need to move. Crossing a conveniently placed bridge, we travel along the canyon wall, evading the dropship that was coming for us. Eventually, we encounter a pair of patrolling Banshees, which can spot you. However, on any difficulty, you can take care of them relatively easily with your pistol. Dealing with the Banshee threat however you choose, either by evading them or taking care of them, we engage a Covenant patrol. Engaging these Covenant troops, we push past them into a valley, where we find a group of Marines defending an odd-looking structure. They are currently being besieged by Covenant forces. Engaging these initial troops, we take care of them and link up with the Marines. They inform us that they've already called for evac. With our new objective, we sit here in this little valley, defending the Marines from waves upon waves of Covenant troops, until eventually we get a call on the radio from Echo 419, who's looking for any surviving UNSC personnel. This first encounter is a great moment to step back and examine Bungie's enemy design. Halo's Covenant forces are primarily composed of grunts, or Ungoi, who serve as the mainline infantry or cannon fodder, the Jackals, Kigyar, who are basically skirmishers or light infantry, and the elites, the Sangheili, who are the field commanders, officers, and also serve as a heavy infantry function. And while there is a fourth type, the Hunters, the main core of most encounters in this game will revolve around these three. And what Bungie managed to achieve here is remarkable. With just 3 enemy archetypes and their various variations, they created a game filled with rich and dynamic combat encounters. Every single battle is a problem-solving challenge. For example, in an encounter, do you prioritize the Jackals who can overcharge their shots stripping your shield, or pepper you with skirmishing fire? Or maybe you focus on the elites who are the commanders of the local forces and use more dangerous weapons while also being just as tough as you are. Or perhaps you need to thin out the grunts who have a tendency to throw their own grenades and mass fire if they have a large enough number of them. Each player has to develop their own threat hierarchy in each encounter, and each encounter offers different solutions based on the tools available in the moment. Speaking of tools, this is an opportunity to speak to the sandbox available to the player. One of the core means with which a player has to interact with the game is shooting, so it serves us to speak on the arsenal of weapons we can use. Let's start with the UNSC arsenal. The MA5B assault rifle has a high rate of fire and theoretical DPS. However, this weapon is fairly dated as far as design goes, in that it's near useless on Heroic and above for anything but grunts, and another enemy type we'll get to later. The SRS-99C S2 sniper rifle is powerful at all ranges, able to pick off nearly any enemy in a single shot. However, ammo is usually scarce, and in close range, unless you have great aim, you'll want something else. The M41 Spanker rocket launcher is the anti-armor weapon of choice. However, I loathe the weapon in Halo 1. It's powerful but slow, and you're more likely to kill yourself if you're anywhere but outside and shooting at a target that's not moving, given that the rocket is incredibly slow and has a tendency to clip against things, exploding before you think it will. The M90 Close Assault Weapon System, or CAWS shotgun, is the premier close-range weapon. However, it's also dated, in that the shot enters another quantum realm whenever you shoot it and the enemy is outside its effective range, per the game's code. And finally, we have the M6D Magnum pistol, the infamous overpowered weapon that can carry pretty much any run if you have access to it. It can defeat almost any enemy, and it is frankly overtuned. This is most likely due to a design crunch and the damage values not being entirely worked out yet, as well as it having the precision weapons tag that the sniper rifle also has, which allows it to take out enemies it really shouldn't be taking out. And now let's move on to the Covenant weapons. The Type 25 plasma pistol is a very underrated weapon. It is a powerful shield stripper with its overcharged shot, able to strip the shields off any elite or jackal you hit with it, but it also has essentially the same DPS of the plasma rifle, which we'll get to next, but it just doesn't have the full auto feature, and you can find one pretty much in any level at almost any time. The Type 25 plasma rifle, on the other hand, is the Covenant answer to the assault rifle, and is frankly the superior assault rifle in this game. It is the best mainline weapon that you can choose to take. It can be useful in pretty much any situation you'll come across, as it's good against nearly anything. While it's weaker, quote-unquote, against flesh than the MA5B assault rifle, it's far more consistent, as it uses projectile-based damage instead of hit scan, meaning you'll be more consistent in dealing damage, and thus more able to effectively take down targets than the MA5B assault rifle. And finally, we have the Type 33 Needler, a legendary weapon for killing elites on Legendary, with its unique feature of homing projectiles that if you stick 8 or more into an enemy, they explode with the force of a grenade. And speaking of grenades, the human grenade, the M9 fragmentation grenade, is fantastic. It has super high damage, a large radius, and a short fuse time. However, they're very hard to find. Compared to the Type 1 plasma grenade, which is a huge fuse that you have to mail the damn thing to your enemies to make them blow up, it makes up for this by being very common, and you can stick them to enemies. And this is where Halo's design philosophy shines. The player is always balancing their options. What weapons are suiting this encounter, and what should they carry on to the next encounters? The moment-to-moment gameplay is constantly enriched by having this design philosophy. Every encounter is asking you, how do you solve this problem, and what should you bring with you to solve the next problem? Back to gameplay, we mop up the final Covenant forces, and we hear Echo 419 over the radio. Lieutenant Carol Raleigh, callsign Foehammer, who's going to be our taxi for this game, is dropping off a gift for us. The M12 Light Reconnaissance Vehicle, aka the Warthog. As she's flying in, we see more lifeboats coming in, and we get our mission for this level. We need to save as many Marines as we can, and the Warthog is our ticket to do so. The Warthog is as iconic as the Master Chief himself. With its 12.7mm triple-barreled anti-aircraft chain gun, it changes the gameplay loop instantly. Driving the Warthog is fun, but pretty imperfect by today's standards. Halo 1's vehicle physics are notoriously floaty, and all the vehicles lack any traction or real weight, often flipping to slight turns or hitting the slightest bump in the road. And worse, you get knocked out of the vehicle when it's flipped, and more often than not, you'll end up killing yourself if you hit the wrong corner. And additionally, your AI companions can't drive in Halo 1, meaning you're stuck driving the vehicle instead of using the fun part, the gun. So you'll find yourself almost never using the chain gun on the Warthog, and most vehicle combat, while cool in theory, often turns into fighting the physics engine than the Covenant. Moving on with the Warthog and any survivors we have left, we drive down towards a tunnel that is not of natural formation, as Cortana puts it, and inside we drive through several corridors until we reach a light bridge. And here we get one of the first vignettes, short little scripted moments that are designed by Marty O'Donnell to let the music swell and let wonder sink in. And here we have the devs talking about them here.
Hello.
Well, Marty, talk a little bit about that little moment that we just saw.
Oh, that was one of those moments.
Famous light
That we
bridge.
just went
There's our ride.
It wasn't actually a cinematic. It was a, what did we call those?
We didn't have a name for them.
That's right. Now they're going to be called
Vignettes or perspectives. But
you and I talked about making sure we had little moments in the game where
Right.
music would come in, camera control would be taken away for 10 seconds.
right, but those really didn't come in until the very end of the end of the project. But they were really easy to do, and I think were some of the more interesting moments of the game.
Crossing this light bridge brings us to the most open part of the game, and is the original promise of Halo. We must now rescue 3 groups of Marines scattered across the terrain, and we get to choose the order, any order we want, and each zone has unique geography and different encounter design. We can choose cliffs that have suffered from a rock slide, where we have intense close quarters combat with sniper support overhead, or perhaps a ravine hilltop, which is a natural defensive position where the Covenant have to assault us from a position of disadvantage, or the underground bunker, which has tight interior corridors leading us to finally clean up the rest of the Covenant before we can pick up the Marines. Each area plays differently, and you can approach in any order. You can bring the Warthog, or you can slog it on foot. This design reinforces the idea that the player is the one in control and respects our agency. Regardless of your approach, your goal remains the same: rescue as many survivors as you can and evacuate them with Echo 419. And while searching for survivors, we find out that Captain Keyes has been captured by the Covenant, and after securing the final group of survivors, Cortana informs Foehammer that we are going on a rescue mission. And this is what leads us to the 3rd level, Truth and Reconciliation. The 3rd level of Halo is Truth and Reconciliation, and is my favorite level in the game. During the 2nd level, we learned that Captain Keyes and his command crew had been captured by the Covenant. They've been taken aboard this Covenant warship, the Truth and Reconciliation, a CCS-class battlecruiser. It had been disabled by Cortana during the Battle of Halo, and our mission now is to infiltrate this ship and rescue the captain. We begin with a night insertion on a cliffside, being inserted with a squad of Marines and a sniper rifle. We get to take in the beautiful juxtaposition from the sunny vistas from the 2nd level into the almost serene night amongst these rocky cliff faces. This opening segment here allows us to utilize the sniper rifle in its intended role, to pick off high-profile targets, and especially the gunners in the stationary guns. These guns feel a bit inconsistent to me. While they certainly can kill you, more often than not they're more of a distraction, and less of a high-profile target in most engagements. Regardless, we open off this engagement by picking off targets with our sniper rifle. And speaking of the sniper rifle, it gets special treatment in this level. It has an expanded ammo pool, allowing you to almost rely entirely upon it during this entire mission. It becomes the backbone of our approach. After this initial group of Covenant, we engage their reinforcements, and if you're quick enough, you can hop into one of the stationary guns and tear them apart. Dealing with them, we push forward and we can take in how Bungie has managed to create interesting encounter layouts with relatively limited terrain options and tools available to them at the time. Utilizing elevation, simple bumpy surfaces, etc., they are able to create dynamic combat encounters. After pushing through the next area, we come across a fortified Covenant force, with stationary guns commanding large fields of fire. In this next zone, Cortana offers us tactical options. We can push through the center, making us more exposed, but drawing fire, which allows the Marines to flank the enemy. Or we can send the Marines up the center to draw fire while we engage the enemy from the rear. This is just another example of encounter choice. A player who cares more about the Marine allies might just charge up the center in order to draw fire for themselves, because they can take more punishment while the Marines can't. Or a more pragmatic player flanks themselves, allowing Marines to absorb gunfire while they clean up the Covenant from the rear. Regardless, we deal with the Covenant and their reinforcements that arrive, and you can grab an active camo power-up, allowing you to sneak through to the next fortified area, the gravity lift, and this is our ticket into the Covenant ship. Engaging the Covenant forces, we cut down a few dozen Covenant with our Marine support. There is a small bug here you can trigger, is if you run fast enough with active camo, you can trip a trigger, where the game thinks you have no Marines alive, which triggers Flowhammer to drop off 5 fresh Marines for you. And if you preserved your Marines until now, you'll now have 10, and you can witness just how useful they can actually be. As the Covenant send multiple waves down the gravity lift to engage us, 10 Marines can cut them down relatively easily, regardless of the difficulty. In fact, on higher difficulties, they're more aggressive and fire more shots with each burst. And even if you don't, well-placed grenades that are timed well can deal with the bulk of these forces when they drop down. The final wave introduces us to the final Covenant type, the Hunters. They are intended to be mini-bosses, with their powerful fuel rod cannons that, if hit you square on, can one-shot you on Heroic and above, and their melee attack that, if you have just a bit of your shields missing, can also one-shot you. However, they possess a fatal flaw. Due to an awkward hitbox, their back is treated as their head, and with the scripting oversight, if you shoot them in their back, or head in this case, with a precision weapon, they're treated as an unshielded enemy. So the pistol and the sniper rifle, which are the only precision weapons in this game, one-shot them, on any difficulty. What should be a tense, high-stakes encounter becomes trivial if you have the right gear. Without those weapons, though, they're dangerous, fast, and aggressive, capable of wiping out a careless player in seconds. With the Hunters down, you can ascend via the gravity lift now, and into the belly of the beast. The interior is quiet at first, eerie even. Even a Marine says a famous last word.
What? There's no Covenant here. Think maybe nobody's home.
Maybe nobody's home. Then the doors open, and what should be terrifying, the idea of camouflaged elites coming to kill us all, becomes laughable as they attack us with giant glowing swords. This is unintentionally hilarious, and the energy sword isn't cloaked itself because of scripting limitations with Halo 1, and Bungie simply couldn't fix it before release, and so these stealthed elites just show up waving giant billboards around saying, "I'm here, and I'm gonna kill you." Regardless, we deal with this initial elite and then engage multiple waves of Covenant, before a door opens with the final wave of troops. Entering it, we find this door is locked, and we'll need to bypass it and unlock it from the other side. Returning to the initial room, we look for a way to get around it, and another conveniently placed active camo power-up lets us stealthily kill or bypass Covenant patrols, and we find ourselves in a supply room where that door leads. And let's pause here and appreciate Bungie's design aesthetic. While the Pillar of Autumn, we saw a gritty, blocky design with the military aesthetic of a machine designed by humans. The Truth and Reconciliation, on the other hand, is a curvy and bulbous, with lots of curves and strange texture decisions and hollow panels that line the walls and lots of purple. It feels very alien. Despite the almost unicolor design, it is implemented brilliantly, which doesn't exhaust the senses, instead it activates them. It feels right, which is a sign of a well-crafted aesthetic. After fighting through the supply room and several corridors filled with Covenant, you reach a shuttle bay where a Spirit dropship is docked. This is a major combat encounter, with Covenant enemies spawning across multiple levels and flanking frequently. The game flexes a combat choreography here perfectly. If you're not careful, your Marines are going to die one by one as flanking Covenant or stray grenades take them out. And if your numbers thin too much, Echo 419 will drop reinforcements here to bolster your team. This area is one of the most chaotically alive combat counters in Halo. You're never safe, and the enemy loves to flank you using doors you just exited, making it feel like the entire ship is descending upon you. This hangar bay forces the player to utilize every single tool at their disposal, as the enemies on higher floors or are flanking you, or even hunters when they charge through a set of doors. You have to use every tool you have. And if you're trying to preserve your Marines, you also got to take care of any grunts that might be throwing grenades, or a flanking elite that wants to melee one of the Marines to death. Regardless, we have to fight our way up through 3 arduous levels as more and more Covenant pour through the doors, and then, finally a set of corridors with more Covenant fighting tenaciously, we reach the command and control center of the Truth and Reconciliation. Standing on the raised dais is a gold-armored elite with an energy sword. We move in and engage the Covenant forces here. If you've managed to preserve ammunition with your sniper rifle, or are pretty good with sticky grenades, you can deal with this zealot relatively easily. However, the Marines are going to stay behind and secure the area while we move into the detention block to rescue Captain Keyes. Fighting forward, we deal with stray jackals and patrolling grunts before we enter the cell block. You can enter a false one with some dead Marines and some stealth elites. However, once we find the correct one, we deal with another set of Covenant and open the doors for Captain Keyes. And in this cutscene, we learn what Halo really is. It's a weapon. Now, the way we learn about it here is another symptom of the development cycle. As stated in this clip,
But there's some choice dialogue that's about to happen. Where
Talk
Captain
about
Keyes,
exposition.
Yeah, well, you know, he is Captain Exposition. That was our nickname.
Yeah, no, tell me about the level we cut.
I can't remember.
I
which
seriously
level
don't
we
remember,
cut.
but I mean, it's all familiar, but
We cut the level where we, in a more elegant way, described this.
right.
Here it comes. What do they call it?
They call it Halo.
Well, of course they do. Chief takes it in stride. Come on.
Yeah.
Chief knows exposition when he hears it. Well, in every movie or game, I mean, there's always that scene, right, where you know you've got to expose the critical details. Usually you try to dramatize it nicely, but there's some drama there. Keyes has got some pipe business.
and as we can see, there should have been a level to tell us what Halo was, but it was cut, and so now we have Captain Exposition. Even with as it is, there are still issues here. How does Keyes understand what the Covenant are saying without translation software when it can only really translate what grunts are saying? Why are the guards even talking about this religious superweapon near the prisoner when it's mostly elites in here who should have more discipline than that? But hey, we still get one of the best chapter titles in the series. Shut up and get behind me, sir. So, I'll call that a net win. With Captain Keyes and his command team rescued, they arm themselves with Covenant weapons and join in our escape. We backtrack, dealing with stealth elites that try to ambush us, and we find out that our original team that came in here was wiped out by stealth elites and their giant glowing swords. But with our suspension of disbelief somewhat intact, we deal with these Covenant, and Cortana makes a contact for Foehammer to try to pick us up. However, she can't. So we need to fight our way back to the shuttle bay and steal the dropship. Fighting our way through and making sure Keyes doesn't blow us up or himself, we manage to finally unlock the shuttle and escape. Some hunters try to stop us, but Keyes crushes them with the ship. Mission complete. Level 4, the Silent Cartographer. The fourth level of Halo Combat Evolved opens with arguably the best combat encounter in the entire game. A beach assault against entrenched Covenant forces. This is what Halo was always meant to be. Large-scale battles with the Covenant. And Jamie Griesmer himself mentions that this is one of the most tooled encounters in the game, as seen in this clip.
You used to have to run around and drop like individual firing points by hitting the spacebar. And I made that beach encounter hundreds of times as the AI would change, and I had to go in and redo it over and over and over and over again.
So good.
It's probably the most refined encounter in the game.
Our mission here, as given to us by Captain Keyes, is to find what the Covenant call the Silent Cartographer. It's a map room that will reveal the location of Halo's control center, which Captain Keyes has tasked us with taking control of. And depending on this difficulty, you'll land on the beach with either 1 or 2 pelicans full of Marines, charging directly into Covenant defensive positions. Once we clean up the Covenant and secure a beachhead, Foehammer comes in with a special delivery, a Warthog. With a few Marines manning the turret and passenger seat, we start moving along the island's outer ring, driving through enemy patrols and other pockets of resistance. Eventually, we reach a large Forerunner structure, where Cortana suspects that this is the location of the map room. Pushing inside, we fight through many waves of Covenant, until a security door locks in front of us, and we're forced to detour and locate the island's security hub to unlock it. This detour takes us to an inlet across the island, where more Covenant forces and a pair of hunters guard the entrance to a security substation. Fighting through a group of Covenant, including a second pair of hunters, we find a hollow panel inside that disables the security doors, and in the process, we trigger a Covenant ambush of stealth elites on the way out. Exiting the building, we hear radio traffic of a dropship getting shot down. Cortana mentions that she made the call for heavy weapons. Making our way back the way we came, fighting through some more Covenant, we find the dropship being looted by Covenant. Clearing them out, we get access to the rocket launcher among the wreckage. As I've stated before, I don't particularly like the Spanker in this game. The rocket moves far too slow, and you're more likely to kill yourself than anything you're actually aiming at, as most things just need to slowly move out of the way in order to dodge it. However, in close quarters, you can make some use of it, though you have to be prepared to kill yourself pretty often. Returning back to the main structure, we find the Covenant have reinforced the position with a pair of hunters, but with the rocket launcher, they're pretty trivial, though when we have a pistol it's also trivial, but that's besides the point. We descend deeper into the structure, and taking a right we get led into another vignette. This one is particularly famous, of the Master Chief kicking a rock off a ledge. This is a good jumping off point to talk about Forerunner architecture, as this entire building is a Forerunner make. We'll be going deeper into the topic of the Forerunners themselves in Assault in the Control Room and 343 Guilty Spark, and more specifically if I cover Halo 2 and 3. But here, the Forerunner design philosophy is clear. It's angular, sleek, and mysterious. There's an almost mystical, religious feel to it. The high ceilings, the shining lights that almost draw your attention upwards towards the heavens, and the designs that marries the art with function. The architecture itself lends the player to wonder about who created this facility and who created this ring. Making our way through the facility, facing legions upon legions of Covenant, we have finally reached the map room. Activating it reveals the location of Halo's control center. And now, we just have to fight our way out, like usual. Making our way out, Rock Anthem to Save the Universe starts playing. We feel like a badass, of course, being the Master Chief, as we cut down more and more Covenant making our way out, hearing about how the Marines are struggling up above. Eventually, we come face to face with the Gold Elite, wielding an energy sword, the one who locked the doors on us previously. And if you manage to save a rocket for him, he's pretty trivial. We finally exit the structure, with Foehammer come to meet us for extraction. And now, we hit another narrative hiccup. Originally, there was going to be a level that bridged Assault in the Control Room and the Silent Cartographer. However, that level ended up being cut, and thus, Joe Staten had to come up with some narrative glue, as usual with a cinematic. And we get a particularly ridiculous one, where Foehammer does a air insertion into a magic hole that opens up in the ground that isn't actually big enough for the Pelican that's going to be going through it, but with some camera trickery we can just ignore that. Regardless, we have finished the Silent Cartographer, and we get to move on to the next stage of the game, Assault on the Control Room. Level 5, Assault on the Control Room. We begin the assault on the control room with a dramatic aerial insertion. We get some grunt comedy, as Joe Staten mentions in this clip.
Let's listen.
Yeah.
Little sniffing.
Oh, Academy Award time right there.
Grunt comedy always gets old.
I forgot how we painted ourselves into a corner where we, needed to do a dropship insertion from like inside a structure, and so we ended up flying down through the manhole on B-30.
Well, in Halo 1, we really didn't have a lot of, big sort of matte painting helped transitions from one space to another. I mean, we had like this tropical island, and then we went to snow, right? And I think I remember one of your concerns was that it was just going to be hard to pull off that transition from one place to the next. So you decided it was easier just to put the Pelican through a tube.
I decided it was easier to make you suffer? Is that?
This is it.
Regardless, we're dropped off by Foehammer onto a platform that's dangling over some random bottomless chasm. After touching down, we get engaged by a Covenant squad. It's quick, and so we push forward. And here we're treated to a new flavor of Forerunner design, a more industrial, functional look as opposed to something that seems like a work of art, as we saw with the Silent Cartographer. Fighting through this initial room, we find ourselves outside and on a bridge. And we see that it's snowing. Cortana makes note of how strange this is. Why would an artificial ring world have inclement weather? It's either going to be intentional, or there are environmental systems that are malfunctioning. which adds to the layer of mystery and awe that the ring gives us, because we still don't actually know what the ring is. We vaguely know that it's a weapon, but what kind of weapon? As we make our way across this bridge, we receive a distress call from Fireteam Zulu, the Marines here in this sector, and they're under heavy fire. Cortana is surprised. She didn't think there were any UNSC forces in this entire section of the ring. Regardless, we fight our way across the bridge, dealing with jackals, grunts, elites, including a gold-armored sword elite. And we find ourselves in another room. Dealing with the Covenant here, or trying to run past them, we find ourselves going down a long elevator. And here, we get introduced to a pseudo-stealth section. There are sleeping grunts in this room. Meleeing them allows us to kill them silently and not alert the rest of the Covenant forces here. And, if we're careful enough, we can also back-assassinate other Covenant troops, including jackals and patrolling elites. It's a nice little touch, and it doesn't impose itself upon you, as, even if you alert all of them, it's the same type of Covenant you've been dealing with beforehand. So, either stealthing your way through, or engaging the Covenant with full force, we find ourselves outside in the open world, and this is the first time we have the entire sandbox available to us. Outside, we have Fireteam Zulu, who are under siege by a large Covenant force. They have stationary guns, ghosts, and a Wraith tank. Reaching the Marines, we now have options. There's a rocket launcher, a sniper rifle, and a warthog, and how we approach this enemy is up to us. We can either hoof it on foot and manually eliminate the stationary guns and tank with the rocket launcher, or we can hang back and pick off high-value targets with the sniper rifle before deciding to move on. Or we can just jump into the Warthog, let some Marines in, and just gun it. Regardless, if we secure the area or run past, around the next bend we find a new toy, the M808 Scorpion main battle tank. Now, to be honest here, when I was a kid, I thought the tank was awesome. However, now as an adult, I have a lot of questions. The coax machine gun on the tank is borderline useless, unless enemies are within breathing distance of the tank, and the 90mm cannon has a super long reload and is highly inaccurate. The tank itself has a huge profile and its design is frankly weird. Those 4 independent tread systems would be a mechanic and the crew's worst nightmare. And Marines are even encouraged to ride on the sides, which makes them completely exposed and turning them into just targets. But hey, at the end of the day, it's still a tank. Pushing ahead with our new weapon, we now engage the breadth of Covenant forces. We have grunts, jackals, elites, hunters, ghosts, wraiths, and banshees. And when listed out, doesn't seem that impressive, especially compared to later titles. However, what matters here is that each encounter feels varied and vast in this entire game. In this next area, the Covenant have fully entrenched themselves. There's 3 Wraith tanks that are shooting essentially plasma mortars at us. 2 of them have high ground and cover, with an additional tank being supported by ghosts and banshees in the front. This combat encounter is one of the best conceptually. It is the promise of large-scale warfare, and for the early 2000s it was. However, in the modern day, this encounter does have its issues. The Wraiths are essentially sitting ducks, with no way to protect themselves in close-range combat, and their projectiles are simply too slow, and if you are aware of your surroundings enough, you can dodge any shot they take. The only difficulty in dealing with the 2 Wraith tanks on the hill is that the main gun of the Scorpion is so inaccurate. And when Covenant troops try to swarm us, we can't effectively deal with them because the coax machine gun is near useless until they're right on top of the tank. And with grunts throwing grenades, we have some major issues here. Regardless, dealing with the Covenant forces here, we push downwards into a large cavernous tunnel that has a pair of hunters down there. However, dealing with the hunters, however you choose to do so, we move onwards to a large door. Opening this door, and a second door immediately afterwards for some reason, we find ourselves in a large cavernous tunnel system, and more Covenant, including more hunters. With this huge array of Covenant forces, including stationary guns, we have to fight hard and press through to the other side, which includes another door. Opening it, we push onwards and find ourselves in a large icy cave system, and as we push towards the top and dealing with any Covenant that are hiding within the rocks before us, we see that there are more spirit dropships bringing out ghosts and more troops that engage us. We cut a swath through the Covenant numbers, including another Wraith and another pair of Hunters, before we find ourselves in a large icy chasm, and we can see that there are Marines here. Supporting the Marines, we deal with an ambush of another Spirit dropship dropping in reinforcements behind us. Taking them with us, we push back to where they just retreated from. The level shifts here again. We climb another ridge, and, if we grab the active camouflage, we can deal with the stationary guns that would pin us down or cut us to pieces otherwise. But this time, while there's ghosts and banshees, we don't have vehicle firepower to deal with them, so we have to rely either on a sniper rifle or rocket launcher if we've managed to save them up until this point. And then, dealing with the final sets of Covenant forces in this immediate area, we go back inside a building. Alone. Why? This is another thing that's always bugged me in this game. We push forward alone. Why? There's no radio message saying that the Marines are going to secure the area, and Cortana doesn't call for evac for the Marines. It's just a weird thing. From here on, the assault in the control room begins to drag. It feels like the level is extending out its length for no particular reason. It feels over with that last Marine assault on this position, and yet we have to fight through more Forerunner rooms, going up another elevator, and crossing more bridges, with only the odd corridors separating all the monotony of the copy and pasted rooms. Even with the two bridges, with the added factor that we have to deal with of more Covenant being on the other bridge that can flank us and give plasma fire onto our sides. With the only difference being when we cross the other bridge, we have to deal with Hunters on the other side shooting at us, which, if we don't have a sniper rifle or a pistol handy, we can't effectively deal with them. All of these rooms begin to add level fatigue onto the player, and when you get to the next rocky bridge where we see the control room itself, and we see a Banshee there, we want to take it. And normally, you can't reach it if you just run for it. And so, repeat playthroughs and encourage you to have a sniper rifle or a pistol to snipe the elite that would steal it from you. Because at this point, you want to choose this level and skip the second room and elevator that will take you down below. And in this clip, I do. I take the Banshee and go straight to the top of the control room. In my opinion, we should have cut out all those rooms and those two bridges and have done a full frontal assault with Marine support to actually take the control room. That way, it actually is an assault on the control room. However you get to the control room, and you will finally fight through the last sets of Covenant, you go through the doors into Halo's control center. This is one of the most important narrative moments in Halo. We're no longer just shooting aliens and surviving, the story is about to take its turn. The control room as we enter it in the cutscene is grand, awe-inspiring. The ambient light and the vast open space makes you feel small compared to the builders of this large, majestic building, for this control center that controls this mighty ring. And as we slot Cortana into the ring system, she's initially overwhelmed by what she finds. She's stunned, uneasy, and then alarmed. This isn't just a superweapon, it's a shield world, and as she digs into what that actually is, she notices something. She begins to process all this data rapidly, talking to herself more than you, the Chief. She brushes off questions from the Chief, and starts muttering as she parses through revelations. And then she finally stops, yelling at us to go stop Captain Keyes because that weapons cache she thinks he's looking for isn't that. She doesn't offer us any explanation, and the Master Chief now needs to run out of the room as we go to the next level. 343 Guilty Spark. Now, Cortana not explaining anything to Master Chief is an issue here in the plot, and I haven't been able to find any developer commentary that really explains why she doesn't explain anything or ask to go with the Chief. It does kind of make sense to have the AI within the control center of Halo, but without Marines here to secure the area, because we went alone for some reason, it makes less sense to leave her here by herself. Our entire initial mission was to keep her from the Covenant. Even if we try to lock down the control center, there's nothing really stopping the Covenant troops from blasting open the doors, now is there? Regardless, that's the end of the 5th level of Halo, and we move on to the 6th level. We begin with an aerial insertion into a swamp. We see a Covenant patrol retreating in this cutscene. Fohammer drops us off near a crashed Pelican. There are weapons and supplies scattered everywhere, but no bodies. There is something clearly wrong here. As we make our way through the swamp, we come across a smattering of Covenant troops and crashed and destroyed equipment. And if you're paying attention, you can spot strange figures in the distance. Eventually, we arrive at a Forerunner structure, with Covenant troops retreating from inside, with a good sign that there's human weapons firing upon them. When we enter the structure, we descend into an elevator, which gives us a glimpse of a new Forerunner interior. Despite its size, it actually feels incredibly claustrophobic. The lighting is dim, the corridors are sterile, and it's overall just a stark contrast to the open grandeur or raw industrialism of previous Forerunner structures. Descending on the elevator, we see Covenant troops that are holding out and prepared, but not for us. They're holding up positions around a door. This gives us an easy opportunity to clear them out with a few grenades, but it's already another sign that something's wrong here. They were trying to keep something in, not keep us out. As we enter into the initial rooms, we engage more Covenant forces, with more of their defenses seemingly in odd locations. In one of the transitioning rooms, we can see that there's green liquid dropping from the ceiling, with jackals huddled together and staring at an intently sealed door, and they're visibly panicked. And when we pass through into other rooms, we see blood covering the walls and Covenant corpses piled in corners, and even unmanned stationary guns turned on their side. And then we find a lone Marine who's firing wildly at us. He screams incoherently about those things and how he's not going to be turned into one of them.
Stay back! Stay back! You're not turning me into one of those things! I'll blow your brains out! Get away from me! Ah!
We can leave him or put him out of his misery. Either way, we press forwards. In another chamber, we activate a light bridge, and past it we find a door that's been smashed open from the inside. And this is where Marty's music starts to guide us through the overall theme and tone of this entire level. It's creepy ambiance that is just unsettling, even for us who have been carving through armies of terrifying Covenant forces through this entire game so far. We can see human blood and more weapons scattered about, and we find ourselves in another structure that takes us deeper into the complex. We see a distinctly human-looking keypad that has sealed a door. Unlocking it, we see a corpse fall upon us, and as Chief clears the room, he finds a helmet for a Private Jenkins. Taking the chip inside, he starts playing the recording of the helmet cam. And this is the moment that Halo changes forever. I can't really do it justice by just describing it, so let's just watch the cutscene in full.
Why do we always have to listen to this old stuff, Sarge?
Watch your mouth, son. This stuff is your history. It should remind you grunts what we're fighting to protect.
Hey, if the Covenant want to wipe out this particular part of my history, that's fine by me.
Yeah, better it than us. You ask them real nice next time you see them, Vicente. I'm sure they'll be happy to oblige.
LZ looks clear. I'm bringing us down.
Go, go, go! Stay close, Jenkins! Mendoza, move it up! Wait here for the captain and his squad, then get your ass inside.
Sir!
Okay, let's move!
Which is weird, right? I mean, look at it. Something scrambled the insides.
What's that? Plasma scoring?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe there was an accident, you know, friendly fire or something?
What do we have, Sergeant? Looks like a Covenant patrol. Badass elite units. All KIA.
Real pretty. Friend of yours?
Now we just met.
Right, well, let's get this door open.
I'll try, sir. But it looks like these Covenant worked pretty hard to lock it down.
Just do it, son.
Yes, sir. I got a bad feeling about this.
Boy, you always got a bad feeling about something. What's going on, soldier?
He's got contact. Lots of them. But they're not Covenant. They're just tearing through us. What the? Oh, no!
Corporal, do you copy? Over. Mendoza, get your ass back up to second squad's position and find out what the hell is going on.
But
I don't have time for your lip, soldier. I gave you an order.
Sarge, listen.
What is that? Where's that coming from,
Everywhere.
Mendoza?
I don't... There! Mira!
Hold still! Hold still! Let him have it! Sergeant, we're surrounded. God damn it, Jenkins! Fire your weapon!
There are too many,
Don't
Sarge!
even think about it, Marine.
Oh, this is local!
Back here, Marine. That's an order. Jenkins!
After the recording ends, we now realize we are in the very same room from that video, and nothing happens at first, which was a brilliant choice that was pushed for by Marty O'Donnell, and allows the suspense to kick in before the massive bang shakes the structure. As a door is knocked down, and for the first time, we meet the Flood. This is the twist that set Halo apart from other shooters of the era. This story twist that there is this enemy that's even worse than the other opponents you've been facing until now. And initially, we get two types of Flood. The infection forms that love to swarm and pop all over your shields, and the combat forms, which are the reanimated corpses of elites and humans. And they charge you recklessly. And even if you drop them, the elite forms have a chance to stand back up, unless you double tap them. This shifts the pacing of the combat of this level dramatically. It's no longer really about the tactics of choosing which enemies to carefully take out in each pack. It's more about just raw survival, as you have to handle the new tempo this enemy forces upon you. We have to be very, very careful not to run out of ammo or have your shields drop at very inopportune times. Fighting our way through several more rooms and corridors, and crossing yet another light bridge, we come upon a key item, a shotgun. Now, the Halo 1 shotgun is the premier anti-flood weapon. It has a high capacity, high fire rate, and it pretty much one-shots any flood form you'll come across. However, I don't particularly like the Halo 1 shotgun. If the enemy is not activating the reticle, meaning the reticle doesn't change color, your pellets enter a different quantum reality and do 0 damage. A byproduct of video game shotguns of the era. It's really annoying. But with our new toy, we start fighting through wave after wave of flood before we find a working elevator and ride it up to the top. And this, we find a surprise. Surviving Marines. Foehammer finally makes radio contact with us, and we rally with the Marines and push towards a possible extraction point. But we find another problem. The Marines are really, really bad at fighting against the Flood. Not only do the Flood, if they have weapons, have hit-scan weapons, which can kill the Marines rather quickly, but the infection forms, if one of them gets onto a Marine, that Marine's pretty much dead. So if you want to keep them alive, you really have to work for it. Either way, we push forward towards a large structure in the middle of the swamp. We see a floating orb that's glowing, and some more machines start to come down from the treetops and engage the Flood around us, and eventually we find ourselves atop that very structure we're fighting around, and we're introduced to 343 Guilty Spark, the monitor of this installation. And without warning, he teleports us away. And that ends 343 Guilty Spark. Level 7, the library. And now we arrive at the level I most dreaded replaying. The library is infamous, not just among fans, but even within Bungie's own reflections for Halo. For many, it marks a moment where cracks in the original game's design truly begin to show. And why? Because this level embodies the declining quality that begins to plague the second half of Halo. Given the game's rushed development cycle and the fact that it was Bungie's first large-scale title on a new console, it's not surprising that the second half suffers from cut content and crunch fatigue. And while earlier levels had several story hiccups due to removed missions, this is where actual level design itself starts to buckle. We begin with a cutscene where we get introduced to the Index, our objective for this mission, and Guilty Spark is telling us we need to retrieve it. It's a key that'll supposedly activate the ring and defeat the Flood. But then he teleports us to the bottom of the library, where we have to begin a very long, arduous march through very repetitive, copied and pasted hallways and endless waves of Flood. And let's use this moment to discuss the Flood as an enemy in Halo. The Flood in Halo comes in 4 primary forms. The Infection forms, which are the small little popcorn guys that rush you, and they're not particularly dangerous as long as your shields are up. However, if your shields are down and they get onto you, you're in real danger. Then you have the 2 combat forms, the Human form and the Sangheili form. The Human form is the weaker of the 2, but it's still dangerous in that many of them come equipped with human weapons, which are hit scan, so you either get hit or you don't from any range. The Sangheili combat form is tougher and faster, and with the added benefit of being able to revive if you down them, unless you do a certain amount of damage to them. Usually, if you don't hit them with the full spread of a shotgun, they're going to get back up, forcing you to double tap them, basically being an ammo tax. And finally, you have the carrier forms, which are the slow, waddling little blobs that do the damage of about like a third of a grenade. It depends on how close you are. But they also spit out more infection forms, which is a nice mechanic. There is some variety here, however, there is a catch. Unlike the Covenant, where each enemy demands a specific approach, elites require sustained fire or grenades to take them down, jackals require precision fire or you have to flank them, and grunts, you have to manage their groups otherwise their volume of fire becomes overwhelming, and hunters require very clever positioning. The Flood, however, have one form of interaction, pointing and shooting at them. The Flood don't use tactics. They don't flank you, they don't lay traps, they just run at you. And sometimes they shoot at you. Occasionally they explode. But mostly, they just run at you and shoot at you. Now, is this a flaw? Not necessarily. The Flood are inherently meant to be a relentless tide. They're a force of nature, not an organized military. At least not as far as the lore is perceived in this game. And they're not here to outthink us. They're here to overwhelm us. And on Heroic and Legendary, this pressure is very real. When your shields are down and a combat form with a shotgun is sprinting at you, while infection forms are crawling from behind you, you do have meaningful choices you need to make here. But the problem is the level design surrounding the Flood. That's where we find the real issues with them. My coverage of the library is actually going to be rather short, because we can just talk about the first section, and you have essentially the entire level repeated over and over and over again. You fight some Flood, you go through some corridors, you go to a door, you either wait for it to open, or you have to sit there and fight Flood while you wait for a Guilty Spark to open the door, and then you eventually get to an elevator, you go up it, and then you repeat. And even something like Rocket Launcher Flood, which is supposed to be very shocking and is pretty funny when you're not playing the level, isn't enough to break all this monotony. And here's the most interesting part. I checked the times on my recordings here, and the library took about the same amount of time as all the other levels, about 20 minutes on normal. But the problem here is it feels longer. It feels like a huge slog. When you compare that to a level like the Truth and Reconciliation, where you're dealing with verticality, sniper combat, outside and inside a ship, the level keeps evolving, and so it doesn't feel like a slog, even though it's roughly the same amount of time as the library. And even Bungie knew it was a problem. Here we can even see, in a clip from the Halo devs reacting to a speedrun, you can see them even pointing out that the level is even long in a speedrun.
Man, even this level is really long.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
I think we probably could have cut a floor or two.
Well, yeah. I mean,
I
this
really
the
feel like
longest, right? 12 minutes for this level, based on the time slice.
this is this is grueling to watch, even with all the cheats.
Yes.
Well, this is also a great example of we didn't know how to like self-produce. Be like, hey, this is just too long. Like the mission feels over like 45 minutes ago.
I think Tyson also.
But you know what? I think a lot of that is the production of this thing too. Is just that when we're working on one thing at a time like this, you can get really lost and
Yeah, that thing needs to be the game-defining thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then it doesn't occur to you until 20 years later that you could have
editing.
There were other things as well that were also taking time.
Jamie Griesmer even describes during this video what the library was meant to be originally, and it sounded awesome.
Originally, it was a giant vault with this like cool corkscrewing like staircase that went all the way down, and the whole time you could see this giant pulsating index in the center, right? And then at the last minute, they just couldn't pull it off for perf, so they just had to wall off the whole stairwell. So you can't see the big chamber. You can't see the big index.
Right. That was
you have
so
no
painful.
idea where you are. But like originally playing it was really cool because guys would be jumping from different levels and you're constantly working your way down. You could see that your objective the whole time. It was really awesome. And then, I just couldn't pull it off for the perf.
Yeah.
A chaotic, multi-layered experience where you climb up towards the index, but you get to see it the whole time, so you actually get a sense of the progress you're making, and with Flood jumping from levels above you and levels below you, and being able to shoot from those levels. That would have created a dynamic experience here, and give you a visual cue to not make you so exhausted with the monotony of this repeated corridors. However, due to the level design constraints, this is what we got. And it's a real shame because thematically, like conceptualized, the library should work. The Flood are meant to be this terrifying, overwhelming force, and here you are alone in an underground alien library trying to find the key to a superweapon to defeat them, while these swarms of corpses are coming back to kill you. However, the gameplay just doesn't support it. You're just at the same level of threat the entire time, and just wondering when you're going to run out of shotgun ammo in order to be able to finally beat this level. Because you're not thinking about the consequences of failure here, you're just thinking about, I don't want to go up another elevator, or I don't want to open another door. Regardless, after what feels like an eternity of hallways, lifts, and ambushes, we finally reach the index. And we grab it, and before we can ask any questions, 343 Guilty Spark takes it from us and teleports us back to the control room. We don't feel triumphant or clever, we're just relieved that the level is finally over. It's such a shame. The library could have been a fantastic level. However, due to issues mentioned beforehand, it just isn't. And you ask most any Halo fan, and they'll say the library is the worst level in this game. However, next up we get to have the same types of issues, but with a different connotation. Next, we'll have 2 Betrayals. Level 8, 2 Betrayals. We return to the control room. 343 Guilty Spark is finishing a conversation with the Chief as we're brought back, which gives us some tidbits of lore about the Flood if you're paying attention. We approach the control console to activate the index. Inserting the index into the control console, Spark observes that something strange happened. Halo didn't activate, because Cortana interrupts us, and she's furious. Chief tries to play it diplomatically, but Cortana cuts through everything, and asks us the obvious question: what does Halo actually do? And here we get the second twist of the game. Halo doesn't kill the Flood, it kills everything else.
The Flood is spreading. If we activate Halo's defenses, we can wipe them out.
You have no idea how this ring works, do you? Why the Forerunners built it? Halo doesn't kill Flood, it kills their food. Humans, Covenant, whatever. We're all equally edible. The only way to stop the Flood is to starve them to death. And that's exactly what Halo is designed to do. Wipe the galaxy clean of all sentient life. You don't believe me? Ask him.
Is it true?
More or less. Technically, this installation's pulse has a maximum effective radius of 25,000 light years. But once the others follow suit, this galaxy will be quite devoid of life. Or at least any life with sufficient biomass to sustain the Flood. But you already knew that. I mean, how couldn't you?
Left out that little detail, did he?
Naturally, the Chief isn't a fan of galactic genocide, and so Cortana absorbs the Index into her code sequence. How she does this when we saw the Index as a physical object, we're going to have to leave up to space magic. However, Spark demands that we hand her over, and we politely decline, which in turn, 343 Guilty Spark responds with one of the coldest lines a villain has ever said in gaming history.
So be it. Save his head. Dispose of the rest.
Now, this cinematic as an entry to a level is one of the best in the game. However, the level that we get isn't that great. We open with combat against Sentinels. We finally get to face off against these enemies, and they are completely unimpressive. Their weapon does relatively little damage except to your shields, and the game teaches you that if you have a plasma weapon, they can be destroyed relatively easily on pretty much any difficulty level. And to me, they're some of the worst enemies in the game. In my opinion, they're worse than the Flood, in that they only come in one type in this game, and all they do is just float and shoot at you. And in response, all you can do is shoot at them. And realistically, in most situations, you don't even get to use grenades or melee because they're too high up. And also narratively, they're pretty weak. They're supposed to be the defense system that the rings use to either contain outside forces or the Flood, but they lose to everything. We get an example in the next area. Opening through, we see the Covenant engaging the Sentinels. And the Covenant usually handily win this fight pretty much every single time. And then we get to realize we're doing the assault on the control room, but in reverse. And this time, there's Flood, which, coming off the library and you're playing this game in one sitting, you get the real fatigue of the second half of this game. The core objective of this level is to destroy 3 pulse generators, which is supposed to buy us time to get to the Pillar of Autumn in order to destroy Halo. Now, how do we disable them? We walk into them and destroy our shields. Why? Let's have Jamie Griesmer explain it.
Well, so much for that, Jamie. So how come we decided that the thing that disrupted the big generators was Master Chief's shields? Was that just a cheat?
What else do we have?
Well, I know. I mean, you remember
that? Yeah. You remember that part where missions get cut and then you got to start applying tourniquets to the story and the cinematics to try and get them to make sense again?
Somebody in the thing said, we have to come up with a way that we can throw a switch that only the Chief can do, but we can't add anything to the game.
There you go.
That's how we decided.
Shields.
Just another example of how development crunch can lead to interesting design, let's say. It's not a game-breaking issue, but it is pretty annoying, especially if you're playing on Heroic or above. If you ever activate the generators, you're almost always going to die at least once. To get to the first generator, we climb down the main building that the control center is based in. Normally, you're supposed to go down ring by ring, engaging Flood along the way. However, a lot of people, myself included, just kind of jump off the side. Your goal: running to the Banshees at the bottom of the hill in order to fly to the first pulse generator. After flying up and disabling the first generator, we then have to fly back to that rock bridge that we came in on during Assault in the Control Room. And now we start with the main conceit of this level, going through old corridors in reverse, but this time we have Flood and Covenant. At first, it's kind of novel seeing a familiar level being infested and taken over by the Flood. However, much like the library, it overstays its welcome. In fact, when looking at the times of my playthroughs of these two levels, the library and Two Betrayals is 6 minutes longer than the library. And while it is less tedious given that we have multiple avenues of gameplay and we get to interact with the entire sandbox, which includes the Covenant and vehicles, as well as the full variety of weapons available, we still get exhausted from the overall length of the level. However, this level also possesses one of my favorite encounters in the entire game. If you remember in Assault on the Control Room, there was a set of 2 bridges. You had to cross each bridge to progress. This time, however, when we cross our bridge, this time in reverse, we get to see the Covenant engaging in a firefight against the Flood, with the Flood even jumping across from that other bridge to the one we're on. This is one of the best encounters in the game because you have all of the complexity of the previous encounters with the Covenant, but this time we have the added third chaotic factor of the Flood, and we get to feel under threat alongside the Covenant, as the Flood are engaging us as well, which is just straight up fun. However, we get the added effect of one of my least favorite encounters in the game, where we cross the second bridge, but this time it's only Flood, and there's rocket launcher Flood on the other bridge. And it's really annoying. And we get continued exhaustion from this level. We're repeating room after room, just in reverse, with Covenant and then mostly Flood. Eventually we make it back down to ground level and we get to steal a ghost as we head towards our next generator. Eventually, as we fight our way past the old familiar ground that we assaulted through, we get to another Banshee, flying it to the next objective. We're entering familiar territory again, this time on foot only, which is annoying because it makes traversal slower and more tedious than the vehicle assault we did earlier. Inside the second generator chamber, Sentinels are fighting the Flood, but once again, they're mostly useless, but they can distract the Flood so we can blow the generator, which then causes Flood to somehow spawn behind us when there was nothing on the platform and it's on a sheer cliff where we had to fly a Banshee to. Regardless, we leave on some freshly spawned Banshees and move on to the next area. As we're flying through the air into more familiar corridors and the rocky cliff sides, we get to see the Covenant's war machine being torn apart by the Flood, which is pretty awesome as we get to see the Flood overwhelming other enemies besides us. As we re-enter the massive indoor chasm area, we're again forced to proceed on foot. We get more Covenant and more Flood in an area where we had a vehicle last time, and it's pretty much drawn out as we look for another Banshee. Eventually, at a Covenant checkpoint guarded by Wraiths, we steal another ghost and dodge and fight through the chaos before we finally make it back to the initial area where we saw the Marines for the first time in Assault in the Control Room. That's where we steal the third and final Banshee to get to the third and final generator. It's guarded by Sentinels, but again, we clear them out because they're pretty useless, and blow the generator. And we're done. However, we get to yet another plot problem that had to be stitched and fixed by Joe Staten. The teleportation problem. As there was a cut level to get us from one area to another, they had to teleport us. The Monitor could teleport, and we could reasonably believe that, given that he's of an alien technology that we don't understand. And Cortana kind of gives us an excuse why we can only use this once. Let's have Joe Staten explain it.
Nice decaling. Now this was one. Oh no, what level did we cut here?
This is ridiculous. Yeah, we're like trying to. How do you disable the power cores? How do we do that? There's got to be explosives. There's got to be an explosion.
You just walk into
what could possibly happen? Wait, why don't we just walk into a big glowy light? If we walk into the lens flare.
Here comes the best exposition of the game. Of course there is.
That's how the Monitor moves about so quickly.
That's how the Monitor moves about. Okay, yeah.
Listen to how fast Jen is talking.
Yeah, because you wrote this like in the last second before she showed up. What?
Jen's saying, what the hell are you people making me read?
I'm pretty sure I can pull it from your suit without permanently damaging your sheet.
Pull it from your suit? Only once.
Well,
why is that, Joe? So how are you going to like distract people from saying, why haven't you been using this method of transportation?
And while 2 Betrayals isn't as bad as the library is, it still has the same types of flaws. It overstays its welcome, and it doesn't use the Flood to its greatest strengths. Regardless, we move on to the 9th and second to last mission of the game. Keys.
Been using this method of
Let
transportation
me just
this
say
whole
the
time.
worst cinematic in the game, which is what we just saw, is actually bookended by the best cinematic in the game.
With the fly through here?
No, don't you remember?
Oh gosh.
Well,
I don't remember.
It was the signature comedy moment of Halo 1 that I think eventually you came around to thinking was actually pretty good, but I mean, you know my impulse is always to put in a little comedy. This I remember you thinking was a bit too much.
I've got a good lock on Captain Key's CNI.
So is this Master Chief and Cortana flying through the level, or is this how they're getting around? What are we looking at here, Joe?
Gratuitous flashy lights.
And then,
yep,
here we are.
This is brilliant.
Oh,
I see.
Nice spark.
Right.
Oh.
Sorry.
He hit
It's a nice
Cortana.
little moment.
It's a great
It's
moment.
a nice little moment.
And that will distract us from thinking about why we're using this transportation grid for one time only.
Yeah, I'm thinking in the cinematic that came before that one, the Chief just should have started hitting his head a lot to distract people from that dialogue.
After the gag, we're dropped into yet another mission that reuses existing assets. But here's the thing. Unlike the previous two levels, I'm of the belief this level actually works. We're back on a Covenant vessel. Now, while it isn't stated it's the Truth and Reconciliation, it has the Truth and Reconciliation's assets. However, what we get here is a reshuffled layout, and the flow of combat is definitely altered to take into account the Flood's strengths, and the context of our being here is very different. We're not just recycling the exact same map and assets as we did in 2 Betrayals, and it's not going to be the same types of level, basically just corridors and just Flood, as it was in the library. This here is a demonstration of the complete collapse of the battlefield we knew in the first half of the game. We get to see the Covenant versus the Flood and what it's doing to the environment around us. As we push through bloody hallways and corpses and wreckage, we see Covenant forces either dead or completely in retreat, and there's Flood everywhere. Eventually, we find a big hole in the ship. If you were me when you were younger and first played this game, or if you're first playing this game today, you might just jump down it. Though it's intended that you kind of sit there and look around for something to do before Cortana tells you to jump down. Either way, we fall down into a big pool of coolant, and what follows is an echo of Truth and Reconciliation's exterior sequence. However, again, it's not a complete reuse of any of the assets. It's the same assets, but shifted slightly. And the combat here is very different. Most importantly, it doesn't stay too long and exhaust the player. We also get an example of new environmental assets, such as the coolant links, and overturned stationary guns, shield emplacements, and Covenant bodies. And as we progress through this outside sequence, we get to see the Covenant fighting and losing against the Flood, which is reinforcing the threat. Because the player actually has a frame of reference for how bad the Covenant can be, and if they're being steamrolled by the Flood, it gets to reinforce the idea that the Flood is an overwhelming enemy. Now, what's supposed to reinforce this is a pack of hunters getting steamrolled by the Flood. However, there's a problem here. There isn't enough combat forms with the right weapons to kill the hunters effectively, and all we get is infinitely spawning infection forms and carrier forms, which, if you sit there and watch, they take an inordinate amount of time to actually kill the hunters. Now, if you pick up the sniper rifles and pick off the hunters for the Flood, they can take care of the rest of the Covenant troops. It seems to be just an issue where they didn't have time to tune this type of encounter right, because the sniper rifle itself is kind of useless against the Flood forms. So I'm not entirely sure. Perhaps the sniper rifle was placed there to just kill the hunters in order to make this encounter easier. But regardless of how you deal with them, dealing with this pack of Covenant, we move on. Eventually pushing past more entrenched Covenant positions, stationary guns, elites, or grunts, where we can either clear them out ourselves or let the Flood do the work for us, we eventually make our way towards a gravity lift. And again, it's not a reused asset. It's on a completely different piece of terrain, and we get to see the effects of the Flood. Instead of the structured military camp style we got in the Truth and Reconciliation, it seems almost haphazardly designed to create a defensive perimeter while they move troops and supplies into the ship. Regardless, we deal with the Flood and the Covenant and eventually make our way back into the belly of the beast. Now we're inside what is essentially the same interior asset from the Truth and Reconciliation. However, thanks to clever environmental work, it feels entirely different. And while 2 Betrayals felt different and the library was entirely different, what we have here in Keys is that there's not too much repetition, because the feeling that the player gets is completely shuffled each time we get a new encounter. And unlike with the library, and unlike 2 Betrayals, the encounters here are almost all completely dynamic. The Flood aren't just running at us in one direction or just from all directions, they're moving in from multiple different directions with reasonable vectors of attack. And the layout being familiar makes sense. It would make sense that the ship's interior is standardized, and so we can completely believe we're on a different ship than the Truth and Reconciliation. And we get introduced to the Spec Ops Covenant units wearing black armor, and these are the best of the Covenant troops, and so we get the real chaos of having the best of the Covenant and the overwhelming force of the Flood with us in the middle. This is peak Halo combat. Pretty much the best encounter area in the level is the familiar shuttle bay. We get to see elites in a hardened position inside the middle of the shuttle bay, and as we approach, we also get ambushed along with the elites by Flood forces, who are all fully equipped with the wide array of weapons available to us. We get Covenant reinforcements coming in from different doors and dropships, and Flood reinforcements coming from the balconies above us and below us. Eventually, fighting through this 3-way chaos, we eventually make our way to the ship's control center, where the transmissions from Captain Keyes are. And then we get to see it. The horror of the Flood may manifest. You see, we were of the belief that Captain Keyes was just captured and is still alive, because we were getting radio messages from Captain Keyes while we were on the ship. Cortana had thought he was dead and was just trying to get the chip in his head so we could detonate the Pillar of Autumn. However, what we see is that the Flood is subsuming Captain Keyes. And personally, while I'll get into the subject later, I definitely prefer the original design of the Proto-Gravemind than the anniversary version. And then, we get one of the iconic scenes of the Halo game, where the Master Chief has to punch in the skull of Captain Keyes in order to get his data chip from his head. An old friend, one of the first NPCs we meet that's named, and we essentially kill them. Regardless, we now need to leave this ship, and we get one of the hardest encounters in the game, ironically enough, because to exit, we get surrounded by Flood at our back and Spec Ops Covenant with fuel rod guns and plasma grenades to our front. Normally, I just try to open the door and have the two sides thin each other out so I can find a position to punch through. I do have a bunch of clips of me dying here to grenades or fuel rod cannon fire, so enjoy some of these. Eventually making our way through, we have to fight our way back into the Covenant shuttle bay, and once we get there, we find a pair of Banshees. Now, you could fight the long way through the corridors and get down to them, or you can just jump down like I think most gamers would do. You just kind of jump down and skip everything and just get into a Banshee, and then you fly away. And what's our next stop? The horse we rode in on, and the final level of the game, the Maw. In the final level of Halo Combat Evolved, we return to where it all began, the Pillar of Autumn. But things have changed, and unlike the repetition from the library and 2 Betrayals, this level uses familiarity as a narrative tool. Where we once had clean and angular hallways, corners, and architecture of the Pillar of Autumn that really demonstrated the martial human design, now it's caked in dust and everything's slightly off-kilt because the ship crash landed, and there's battle scarring everywhere. And there's of course the Flood. After the initial cutscene, we crash land a Banshee into a life pod airlock. Ironically, we enter the ship the same way we left it. Our new objective is to reach the bridge. Our plan at the moment is to overload the reactors, which should destroy the ring. As we move through the once familiar corridors, the halls are overrun with Flood, Covenant, and Sentinels, all vying for dominance in a ship that doesn't belong to humans anymore. The damage to the environment just tells us how things have fallen apart. We can feel humanity being slowly extinguished on this ring. Entering the familiar maintenance tunnels, we then drop down into an access shaft. Fighting through the old cafeteria, the site of our first combat encounter in the game, we now meet more black-armored Spec Ops elites who are holding the position. Pushing through, we finally reach the bridge. It's overrun too, of course, and cleaning out of Spec Ops grunts who are wielding fuel rod guns, we slot Cortana into the bridge, bringing her back home. However, 343 has other plans. He stops the countdown, giving us an interesting lore tidbit that, looking into the ship's logs, he has a record of all the lost time since the firing of the rings. And Cortana is out of options, and so Chief decides we'll just do things manually. Retracing our steps, we fight through the ship, eventually making our way into the cryo bay where we first awoke, but this time it's filled with Covenant, Flood, and Sentinels, with the chaos of the firefights between the three factions, creating interesting combat dynamics. Do you wait and allow the enemies to thin each other out and mop up the survivors, or do you just try to run past them, dealing with enemies as you go? Eventually fighting through more and more corridors that are familiar yet different, we eventually find an armory. This armory is thankfully stocked with every human weapon in the game, with grenades, except for a sniper rifle. But the primary weapon we want here is a rocket launcher. Eventually we reach the engineering bay, and we begin the process of destroying the coolant couplings that cool the reactor and prevent it from going critical. To do this, we fight up a few levels into these little podiums, which uncouple some esoteric shielding from the reactors. It doesn't make sense that it works this way, but for a gameplay mechanic, it's pretty cool. And if you're clever enough, you can shoot a rocket or throw a grenade into the slot and have enough time to jump back up to the higher level so you don't have to fight back up the stairs. Regardless, once you do this 4 times, you have finally successfully set off a chain reaction, and now it's time to escape. Escaping through the maintenance corridors at the highest level of the engineering bay, we fight our way to a main elevator shaft. Here, we engage a final group of Spec Ops Covenant, which, if you saved enough grenades or still had rockets handy, is a pretty easy encounter. Regardless of how you deal with the Covenant forces, you go down the elevator. Cortana asks for evac from Echo 419, just one last pickup from the reliable pilot. Going down into the vehicle bay, we take a Warthog, which, should be noted, these Warthogs are slightly faster in this portion of the game. Regardless, we begin the famous Warthog run, where you have the main Halo theme swelling as you drive through this very long and logically inconsistent trench, which is actually longer than the Pillar of Autumn itself, but most people can just ignore it. About 3/4 of the way through, we make it to a landing, which doesn't make any sense, that there's a bridge with a bunch of empty space between the sections of the Pillar of Autumn, but again, most people just ignore it, and we get to see the final fate of Echo 419, as the lieutenant is shot down by a pair of Banshees. Completing the run, we finally make it into the fighter bay, where a longsword interceptor, the last one on the ship, is docked. And fighting our way through, or just running straight through with the timer ticking down, we approach the steps and the final cutscene plays, where we escape the ring and it detonates, completing the game. Halo 1's plot is relatively simple, especially compared with the following entries in the Halo series, yet in its simplicity it finds strength, with the only named characters being Cortana, Captain Keyes, 343 Guilty Spark, Foehammer, and the Chief. Yet these characters, despite their simplicity, fit into the story well. Captain Keyes is a by-any-means commander who isn't afraid to lead from the front, considering he was willing to fly the ship manually to land it, or lead the fire team of the surviving Marines in the Truth and Reconciliation, and the fact that he led the entire team who went to find that weapons cache, which turned out to be the Flood. And even while being taken over and turned into a proto-Gravemind, he was still attempting to do his duty, ordering Chief to leave him behind. He was a man of extraordinary courage and duty. Even a minor character like Foehammer, despite her limited lines, Demonstrated through her actions, she was also brave and dutiful in this war against the Covenant. 343 Guilty Spark is intelligent while also being naive in a purely machine way. He cannot possibly comprehend why Chief and Cortana would try to stop him, for he sees the bigger threat, the Flood, and he needs to activate Halo as his protocols dictate. He was created solely to take care of this ring and to watch for the Flood. And Cortana, of course, is witty and hyper-intelligent as an AI, while also serving to be the main voice of our shell, the Chief, as Chief himself rarely speaks. And we can hardly talk about Cortana without talking about the Chief, for they're inseparable. They operate at their peak when they're together. Chief is designed to be the vessel for the player. The intention of Bungie was for players to feel like the super soldier who was saving the universe. And while Chief certainly has a character, which we'll get into in later entries of Halo, his actions and few bits of dialogue are meant to be things that the player would probably say or do themselves if they were in his situation, if they were a super soldier saving the universe. It's meant to increase immersion into the world itself and being Master Chief who's doing all these awesome things. As for the plot itself, while Jason Jones and Staten did their best, the story is incredibly simple, and it has plenty of problems. However, the plot issues here, as we mentioned during the level by level, were not a cause due to a failure in discipline and writing, but caused by the logistical constraints of game development itself. And unlike with a novel or even a film, which could have these types of issues, the game itself, as its nature of being a video game, has certain conceits that are of a higher priority than the story. Making sure the game actually functions and is fun to play is of a higher priority than the writing of the game, which, given the rapid nature of this particular game's development, we should be grateful we have as solid a story as we have, and we can see all of the deeper tidbits of lore that's hidden behind the plot that gives us greater depth when we analyze it. We can see that humanity is fighting a losing war. We were fleeing a planet called Reach, and yet these superior Covenant forces found us, forcing us to ditch our ship, and after crash landing, we regroup and begin a rescue operation to save Captain Keyes, the senior officer. And then we find out this ring we're on is a weapon, which naturally leads us to secure the control center for the ring, which we need to locate it, so after finding a map, we attack the control room and take it over. Meanwhile, the captain led a sizable force to locate a Covenant weapons cache. However, it turns out it was a lab containing the Flood, which turns the entire operation on its head. We have to immediately trust the local AI who says we can activate Halo to wipe out the Flood. However, thanks to Cortana, we realize the weapon kills everything, not just the Flood, which forces us to find a way to stop Halo by destroying it. We delay the activation and try to find Captain Keyes' corpse, because we need his command lace from his head, which forces us to kill him ourselves and retrieve the codes we need, as we see him being turned into a proto-gravemind. Eventually making our way back to the Pillar of Autumn, we successfully detonate it and destroy the ring, fleeing into space aboard a single longsword fighter. Looking out into space, with just dust and echoes around us, wondering what's going to happen next. It's an incredibly simple plot, but it's solid. Those overarching beats are connected in a logical manner. The problem is, the deeper details of the plot, moving from point to point, or more specifically level to level, has issues, which I covered in the level by level. And this is again due to the issues of the game's development cycle. However, a flaw is a flaw, and the problems I mentioned are problems with the plot, which prevent it from being a great story, instead of just being solid. Yet, it is more understandable in this instance for it to occur than, say, in a film or television production. For unlike a game, the core of what makes a film or TV show operate is the writing, whereas the core of what makes a game function is the gameplay itself, for that is the primary means with which its audience engages with that media. You can have a average story, but a fantastic gameplay loop, and players will love your game. If you have a TV show with just an average story, no one's going to be talking about it, or they'll watch it and forget about it. While I do love Halo 1, it doesn't have the strongest story. Yet the story of Halo 1 fulfills its purpose. It gives us meaningful context to the actions we're taking into the game, despite the issues in plot that arose due to issues in game development. But let us move on. Part 4. Music. Halo wasn't just a trendsetter in gameplay, storytelling, or world building. Thanks to the talents of Marty O'Donnell and Michael Salvatori, it redefined what video game music could be. Marty didn't score to the game, he scored with it. He was deeply involved with the developmental process. He worked hand in hand with pretty much every facet of the team in order to build a soundtrack and that was deeply reflective of the game as a whole. This is one of the many components that allows Marty's music to be so resonant with players. You can share almost any of his tracks with anybody who hasn't played Halo at all, but you can feel everything he wants you to feel. Because he worked with the design team to understand everything that they intended for players to feel. Let us go over some of the examples of how Marty's music is so impactful. Starting with the most iconic piece of all the series, the Halo theme. Where most shooters of the early 2000s relied on metal riffs and techno loops, Halo opened with the iconic Gregorian chant. With its mysterious, effervescent, almost ephemeral sense of feeling, you can immediately understand the intention behind the piece. It wants you to feel like you're exploring something new and alien, which is what you're doing in the game. You're going into an alien ring world, one of the most alien types of things you can come across. Or perhaps we'll have Rock Anthem for Saving the World. Which is a tribal war drum paired with electric guitars. It's a very heroic, energized piece that gets you into the firefight. It plays in the second half with the silent Cartographer as you're fighting your way out through waves of Covenant forces to get to extraction. Under cover of night, however, is haunting, almost restrained with its mysterious yet creepy feeling you get as you're sneaking through the canyons to get to the Covenant ship. Halo was a trendsetter, and by extension Marty O'Donnell and Michael Salvatori, who also worked on the music with Marty, in that they created music that would respond dynamically to the player and their actions. And they did it fantastically. Marty worked very closely with level designers to ensure that the music didn't just simply play over gameplay like contemporaries. It played with it. It would change and use the simple looping phrases that Marty is now famous for that could expand, retreat, get louder, quieter, all depending on what you were doing at the time. If you were simply exploring an area, the game would put on a more ambient and reserved track. But if you get into a firefight, a more engaging tribal music would kick in, or perhaps a more energetic one depending on the types of enemies you're facing. And then as you finish the encounter, the music will taper down into a more ambient music yet again. If you enter a new section of a level, you'll get a familiar melody, but it's different. Marty mentions in his interview with the Actman that he loved just creating new but familiar tracks using older ones, building off these simple melodies. Part 5. Legacy. When I first stepped onto the Halo ring all those years ago, I was a child. I was wide-eyed and awestruck. I didn't understand what I was seeing, but I felt it. I felt important. The superhero that would save humanity from the alien foe on this hostile alien ring world. And as I grew older and following titles came out, I fell in love with not just the game, but the world and the characters and the lore, everything. with what it meant. And as I developed intellectually, I finally developed a vocabulary to express that love. But now, over 2 decades later, we have to ask this question. Does Halo hold up in 2025? And let's get one thing out of the way. If Halo Combat Evolved released today, as is, it would be dated. Its movement is floaty, the physics are inconsistent, and the second half, while iconic, is just a deep slog. And there's deep flaws in the plot, the gameplay design, everything. So let's not pretend otherwise. It's not a perfect game. However, even with all that, Halo still has a leg to stand on. Its legacy isn't just nostalgia, it's tangible. This game is what set the standard for what a first-person shooter on a console should be. And before Halo, PC reigned supreme in the first-person shooter genre. After Halo, that monopoly was shattered. And even today, the minute-to-minute gameplay is still impactful and responsive. The 30 seconds of fun philosophy is still here. It's where it was developed in the first place. And the sandbox may be smaller than other titles, but as mentioned before, every single tool in this sandbox is useful. Every encounter is well balanced. Nothing is too overbearing. The human weapons all have a place within the sandbox, with the only possible exception being the assault rifle. But that's simply because other weapons are simply so much better. The Covenant weapons are easily as viable as any other human weapon. And the enemy AI is still impressive to this very day with its actions. The encounter design alone with the enemies you face and the Covenant is still iconic to this very day. With only 4 enemy types, Bungie managed to create a game that has wide and varied combat encounters. And even when the pacing falls apart, the library, I never felt like I wanted to stop playing. Even on my most hated level 2 Betrayals, I was still having fun when I got into combat encounters. And I've played through these levels multiple times just for this video. I was still enjoying myself each time. It wasn't a slog to go playing through those levels. I would say the only one I really didn't want to replay was the library. And that's not just nostalgia, that's solid game design. Now, no discussion of Halo's legacy is complete without addressing the anniversary editions. To understand this problem, we'll need to look at what Bungie built in the original. Artists like Shikai Wang and Paul Russell had a very clear and deliberate vision when they created Halo's art style. It was simple and functional, but more importantly, it was very iconic. The UNSC was grounded with very blocky designs, heavily inspired by Alien, and you could feel the gritty sci-fi nature of it. While the Covenant, on the contrast, were bulbous, smooth, and very distinctly alien, inspired by sea creatures, with lots and lots of purple, of course, and the curves. It made their architecture feel alien, and it was immediately readable to pretty much anyone who viewed it. And then comes the Anniversary Edition, and with it, a major blow to Halo's identity, and one of the first problems that 343 created. Now, I'm a certified 343 hater. I hate them and every single thing they've done to Halo. And the Anniversary was just the beginning of the end. The difference is that Bungie's was very directed in aesthetic and being grounded, while 343, however, 343 has a very hard to describe problem with their art style. They make everything too big, too bulky, too cartoony for my tastes. The best example I can give you is the Spartan designs. Let's look at the Spartan designs for the Noble Team, Spartan 3s, from Halo Reach, versus the Spartan designs for Halo 5. Notice how Noble Team, each member with their armor design itself, gives you an idea of what they're best at, what their personality is going to be like. Now, if I ever cover Halo Reach, I'll go into more depth about this, but just looking at these 2 images alone, which one do you think describes their characters the best? If you look at Fireteam Osiris, I personally see just blobs of weird, curvy, slippery architecture. Yet with Noble Team, I see a dedicated team of specialists who have all come together to work towards a common goal. I'll also freely admit I really genuinely hate 343 and everything they've done to Halo. But let's go back to the anniversary. Pretty much every facet of the game was touched by 343. The sound design is completely different. It's similar but eerily different, giving you an uncanny valley when you use specific weapons. The lighting is just destroyed everywhere. So many areas are just so bright, it doesn't make any sense. Places that should be very dark are bright for no reason. Even in the Halo 2 anniversary, which I personally enjoy, it has the same problem. They even changed the weapons to be just worse versions of the Halo 1 weapons. Unlike in Halo 2, which takes the same themes and the identity of the weapons in Halo 2 and enhances them to be more in line with a modern video game, Halo 1 just tries to make them like Halo 4 weapons, which does not keep the identity of the weapons at all. And again, of the two anniversaries, Halo 2 is far superior, and especially the blur cutscenes. They just give a new breath of life to Halo 2. But Halo 1 Anniversary is just an insult. As for multiplayer, Halo 1's multiplayer was horribly unbalanced. The pistol is dominant, except when you have a sniper rifle and long sightlines. And, to be honest, it wasn't that strong. Add to the fact that I don't particularly enjoy the MCC's recreation of the Halo multiplayers in all of the games, I won't be covering that in this video. I may cover it in Halo 2, 3, almost certainly in Reach if I cover those games. However, Halo 1's multiplayer, to me at least, was tied in directly to the time I was living in. And the quality of the multiplayer was tied directly to being able to create new friend groups, at least for me. Replaying some of it, it just isn't that fun compared to the campaign experience. And I'm also of the opinion that the campaign experience is the core experience of what Halo is meant to deliver to you. Part 6. It's hard to describe how Halo shaped Bungie after its launch. Bungie was nearly bankrupt and was now the flagship developer for Microsoft and their brand new console. Halo wasn't just a game, it was the game that made you buy an Xbox. If you were at school and you didn't play Halo, then you just weren't cool. It was the game you played at sleepovers and staying up as late as you could with pizza and chips, yelling at each other as you died to a ghost running you over. It was the game that helped me develop some close friendships that last to this very day. We had a common interest in a game that gripped each and every single one of us. Halo 1 set the standard for what a game should be like for me. And it was the start of a legacy. And even as Halo 2 was announced in 2002, I had completely fallen in love with Halo. And even now in my late 20s, if I hear the Halo theme at the right time, I can get a tear coming down my face. Even though that love has been hurt, and the memory has been tarnished by the mishandling of 343 and certain other studios, I still deep down love Halo. This has been Zach with etc. etc. Thanks for watching.